application, and they're not the same. I know this document's called fire stopping, fire dampers. The one thing for me is just looking from the outside is that we've ended up having to break it all out. So we've got documents on fire dampers, documents on smoke control dampers, documents on fire stopping for pipes, trays and trunkings, and stuff on flues. We've had to break it out because the seal rules are different. Distances are different. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm being controversial. So just
no, I think that does. I think that does, Paul.
That was my first
and
observation.
certainly, I think we need to consider that as we go through.
Yeah.
Would you do me a favour? Would you put that point into the chat?
Yeah, no, I will do. Yeah,
because that's quite a nice framing, early framing statement, I think, to the document.
Yeah, can I just explain? You're quite right, Paul, that what we need to do is to bring this back to the individual asset types, and we've not. When we ran the first 3 workshops, we did one on AOVs.
Yeah.
We did one on fire dampers. Fire doors, and another on cavity barriers, and they were sufficiently different that we had a complete workshop on each.
Yeah.
What we were then trying to do was to try and streamline things, and to be honest, this was me really trying to, we weren't sure, I wasn't sure whether it would be meaningful to have a whole 2-hour workshop on fire stopping, but I actually think it probably would have been sensible to do that now. And I think what we're actually doing with this information, by the way, Paul, and everybody, is we're going to be drawing this out into data templates, working with the BRE, so that we can have something for fire stopping, something for smoke and fire dampers, and something for the other, dry walling, for example, which is another different element. It's got very different properties, and we're from the last workshop where Joe Celia from FIS was on. Joe's got a massive amount of knowledge about think the sort of things that the partitioning systems, and in each of these cases that's why these groups are so important. People like Paul, for example, you've got enormous knowledge on things like dampers, so and the other elements as well, smoke control. So therefore what we're really trying to do is get your steer, and that's been really helpful what you've just said there, Paul, because it reinforces the fact that we need the detail. And I'm not sure that we've got this as the perfect way of doing things, but I think we're on a journey.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe we shouldn't use the word fire stopping at all, and we should use pipes and cables and dampers, etc., because the issue is that pipes and cables don't have a fire performance. The fire stopping that goes around them does, but the dampers and ducts, whilst they are fire stopped around the outside, they have their own performance. So you can't necessarily mix and match the materials that you would use just by saying, oh, this is a fire stopping to part 3. So maybe it'd be better to look at the actual elements and call them pipes and cables and not fire stopping. Break it
down now.
Yes.
Is what you're saying. Okay, well, what I suggest is if just puts the first question up, we start on that, and you doing that, just? Yeah, great. If we start on this, we can get moving and adapt as we go along. Okay, I think I've asked you all at the beginning. You've all actually had a good chance to have a good look through this. So in terms of this first question, George, do you want to introduce this first question briefly?
Yeah, so when we first started going through this with the HSE, they basically, and this is through the Golden Thread Initiative working group that I'm chairing, What they basically said is that it's not so much the asset itself that's the critical thing, it's the risk that the particular asset is protecting against. So what is it that could happen that this particular asset of fire stopping, for example, or a fire damper or a smoke damper, what is it protecting against? And by doing that, what we're trying to do is to have a checklist of things that could happen that we need to be protecting against. So that's point one. Secondly, on this, there's another part of the Golden Thread Initiative group that we're sort of working with that's also looking at classification. So within Uniclass, which some or all of you may already know, there are tables within Uniclass under the project management section to deal with risk. So one of the things that we're doing, we're taking this and feeding it back to the team that's working on that. And the intention is this will become this will be expressed with a classification in Uniclass, which I think is a good thing. We don't want to be entirely reliant on Uniclass, but the idea is to try and flesh out Uniclass to be better. And by doing that, if we can then standardize the way descriptions or risks are defined, we can then standardize the way that you might mitigate a risk. So that's the idea. Okay.
So I want to go straight actually to Paul White, to kind of follow on from what you were saying just before we actually moved onto the questions. So looking at this, how would you change it? Add to it, augment it, shall we say?
Yeah, the points that I made is because the title indicated flats and apartments essentially. Houses are slightly different. That generally you don't have compartmentation inside the flat or the apartment. Okay, so the point is that your compartmentation is the flat itself. You used to have fire doors inside. Generally speaking, you don't now because people just propped them open anyway. But the point is to remain in place as a concept. Then the flat or the apartment would be its own compartment. So the flat where the fire is, it stays in there and it can't get into any other flats. Now, the point about that then comes is where are your entry and exit points for services that would compromise that? Yeah. So the first thing would be where all your pipes and cables come in. Then they would need to be fire stopped or collared or whatever you needed to do to all the pipes and cables. One of the points I made to you going through is that generally speaking, you wouldn't have an air supply into a flat or an apartment from the common areas.
Okay, so in terms of the actual question, yeah, is everything you're telling me now, is that in your email?
It is, yeah.
Then I apologise that it's not all in there. We can't, as you can appreciate, we do have to kind of chop things about a bit, but it will be. I don't need to ask you to type it into the chat.
Yeah. Okay. So my point is, I suppose that the other thing that we've got to look forward to is change. We also have Part L of the building regulations, which everybody knows is, and also we have Part F, which are being revised. And one of the issues that we're going to have now is places not staying warm enough, but we're going to have to actually cool them because they're going to get too hot. So at that point, then we may well have new things going into apartments.
Yeah, we're going to be moving on to that, Paul. I think it's the question 5, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, so, okay. But the point is you will need this. At this point, because if you start putting ducts into flats, then you will need to protect them. And then the other point that I made in my email was the fact that if you have a common extract system, which a lot of places, certainly older buildings, do, then essentially they link all the apartments. So therefore, all those extract shafts and ducts and whatever you have, toilet extract, bathroom extract, if they're all in there and they're not going straight to outside, then they are ducts and they will need protecting with dampers. So so you've got two things. You've got ventilation going in that may arrive, but you've also got extract systems that could well be there even now.
Excellent. And we've got that in your email.
That with heat recovery ventilation, because that may be done on a flat by flat basis, and that should hopefully just go inside to outside. But what I'm trying to say is don't just constrain this to your question, which is
no, believe me, we're not. But at the same time, we do need to have some focus.
I'm trying to broaden out, but I'm trying to broaden your focus, because if you don't, you will miss stuff. Because
sure, I understand that, Paul.
It's all about ventilation. It's not about fire stopping. No,
I take your point fully. Believe me, and we certainly will be doing that. Emma, anything you'd like to add to that?
Richard, Nick's got his hand up.
Oh, have you? Sorry, I can't see everybody. Nick, sorry, Nick, I'm not seeing your hand.
That's okay. One of the things I was thinking of, which probably needs adding to this list, is the risk of structural failures caused by things not being fire stopped, particularly where you've got things penetrating the external facade, balcony brackets, canopy supports, all that kind of thing. Where if there wasn't fire stopping in place, it could damage the materials, the fixings, and things could fall off, if you like. And there's two parts to that. One is obviously the risk of the structural components, but also putting it at added danger to the fire brigades as well. Obviously, that's a couple of other things it mitigates, really.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Nick, could you type that into the chat for me, and just we'll put that straight into the document in the notes.
Sure.
Thank you. Emma, where are you?
David's got his hand up, Richard.
David, I'm not seeing people's hands going up.
I thought you were just ignoring me, Richard. It's okay. It's normal behaviour.
As usual.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't add anything to this list. I can't think of anything to add to the list. And I think the comment Nick made about the structural safety is a really good one. So yeah, it should be added. But George, you spoke about ultimately this information making its way into the Uniclass system. I'll be honest, I don't know enough about that to be able to comment on it. But I'm just wondering whether we could cluster these risks, because in essence there are really two risks. It's about people and it's about the asset. So the risks that we're trying to mitigate are all about saving people's lives and saving the asset. So I'm just wondering if kind of clustering these from a long list into something more readable and something more visual, that there's value in just clustering around those two.
Sure.
Those two risks.
More in terms of layout, actually, I suppose, organisational of the actual document.
Yes,
just for people to read it and understand it.
Yeah, no, I'm all for breaking up, David. I think you're absolutely right. It makes it more digestible, doesn't it?
Can I just answer that, Richard? So the important thing here, David, what we're trying to do is capture the knowledge of the collaborative here.
Yeah.
This is a data collection exercise rather than being how it's going to be consumed.
Yeah, okay.
So what we're doing with this already, and if anybody's interested, I can give you. We've recorded some of the work that we're doing with BRE on cavity barriers, for example, as to how this can then be taken and put them into data templates. Because once they're in data templates, so that they can be consumed and presented in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
And that's really where we're going to be going with this. And you will see that when we look through the document, you'll see some things are repeated in different sections. And if you were just reading it as a document, you'd say, well, why is that being repeated? That was already answered in section in question 4. The reason is because we want to make sure that they're self-standing in their own right, and therefore can be presented as a package in whatever form people want to consume them.
Okay, no,
Paul.
thank you.
No. Yeah, so just really quickly, I think I put that note in the chat, and I do apologise, George, because I didn't get the chance to send anything back until today. Unfortunately, it's just been a bit of so I was a bit late into it all. When we get onto the big thing for me, I think when we get onto the next part of it is, I think Paul was alluding to it as well. It's just that because the fields of how you install these things like dampers, fire stopping is so different. I just think how you do the data sets, when you look at what goes into the unit class, when you look at, because you've got length measurement, everything that goes inside there, I think it's gonna cause a problem if you don't break it out. That's just my view at the minute. So sort of harp on about that one. It's just
no. Well, when we come to that, I think that's why if we can get through these more straightforward ones a bit quicker, we can we'll have more time for the difficult ones, the more complex ones to come. Mike Smith.
Yeah, I mean, it was just to add that I would definitely support including a uniclass in these sections. It's obviously something that we need to promote more within the industry. So anything we can do to be starting to show uniclass as being a classification system that we should support, definitely behind that.
Martin.
Hi there. In terms of this first question, I think it was your earlier speaker, David, identified that this question asked what risks, and it's a straightforward single answer or relating to the ensuring that the spread of fire and smoke doesn't occur before the element to which it's passing through. So the other items you got there are the consequences of that failure, not the actual risk itself. So I think it's more simplistic to keep it as the risk is failure of smoke.
Possibly there's a headline risk, and these are sub risks that come out of that headline.
Well, they're a consequence of that risk.
Consequence, yeah. Would you like to just make a quick note of that in the chat for me?
Sure.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, anybody else? Okay, I'd like to kind of move forward, really. So can I assume that nobody's got anything more to add to question 1 or the first part of question 1?
Or if you have, send it afterwards.
Yeah, by post.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, I'm going to close that one. Chris, just can you move down to the second part of question 1, question 1B? What are the risks that the asset itself is susceptible to? So, same question. Has anybody got anything to add to what's already there?
Yeah, so this is, I was going to put in the chat what I put in my response so you can see it essentially.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm not trying to be too over the top. I had to look at 25mm holes for a long time as well, which was a bit like that. But honestly, it's just to say, look, the big thing here, you know, for me, it's all about, and this is just what, you know, it's like, and you talk about Joe with the FIS as well, incorrect wall type and understanding the groupings of wall that's tested. BS476 walls versus 1364 Part 1 walls, direct compatibility with the test standards, you know. And it's all about the incorrect vertical, and it should say horizontal seal. There's all different rules depending on what's been tested under what field. Just because you tested, and Paul said I think earlier as well, just because you test something to Part 3, it bears no resemblance to what you test under Part 2, and it's completely different to fire rated ductwork. They're just not the same thing. And when it comes down for us as a business about competency, who's down to install them, if I see a fire stopping company on site putting gypsum plaster around a damper, I take a photograph and question why they're doing it, because they're not necessarily the right people to do it.
We've got that to come, Paul. You can.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
We'll all enjoy that. Competency is always quite an interesting one.
Yeah.
In our meetings.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else got anything to actually add on to that listing? I'm going to take that as a no, so I'm going to close that one, and we're going to move on to questions.
Sorry, Richard. Just briefly. The last but 1 point, no builder's frame to permit damper expansion. That's a bit of a misnomer. So I'd take.
Sorry,
that one.
which one is that, Paul? Are you talking?
The bottom but one, no builder's frame to permit damper expansion. In 1B, you've gone down a page, I think.
All right, can you go back to 1B just sorry.
Oh, hang on. Have you got a version?
Here we go. No, there, look.
Yeah, no builder's frame to permit damper expansion. That's a fairly old concept now, but basically it just needs to be installed according to their instructions, whatever you use. So you don't need to put the.
What you're saying, we need to delete that one.
Yes, you can delete that one. Yeah.
Hang on, Paul. Yeah, this is for existing buildings as well.
Yeah, no, but the point is that's describing expansion, and that's irrelevant. It's the damper must be installed according to their instructions. They've dealt with the expansion or not expansion. They've done all that for you.
Yeah.
So you don't need to build in expansion, and that implies that you have to make sure there's room for expansion. And actually, it's been proven over various years now that you don't need to allow for expansion. It's a mistake.
Oh, okay, fine.
Okay, yeah, excellent, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, just down to question 2.
So just to say, I know we haven't. The big thing for me, I know we have on that 1B is that. Sorry to lane the point, but there's nothing wrong with dampers and ductwork. It's all about the supporting construction. It's the wall that's always wrong. You know, just in in my experience, we don't build walls right. So I mean, that's why I sort of put that little bit in the right hand side, just to say it's about the supporting construction is the biggest thing that goes wrong. Because if a damper's tested 122 mil wall, which still relies upon the seal thickness, you can't go smaller. Whereas a fire rated duct can go smaller. This is the thing. It's different horses for courses.
The purpose of us putting this particular question in Paul, I take on. I mean, obviously, the whole point about this is for you to give your knowledge, and it's a matter of where we put it. The purpose of this question was really to say whether there's a particular thing that happens regularly that maybe a building safety manager needs to watch out for that could damage or impact on a particular asset performing properly.
Yeah. And the wall's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, and that's Paul's point. If they've mismatched the product with the wall or the floor, then there's a chance that it won't work.
I see what you mean. Sorry, yes.
Yeah. So it's quite hard to articulate, because I know, Paul, you know, from other things that we do externally. I think the thing is, I'm sort of I'm down a rabbit hole with wall types, and I mean, the business I worked for at one point was saying that if it's CE marked, it's fine, and I was like, no, it's not fine, because just because a damper's CE marked, if it's been tested in solid, you can't put it in flexible. If it relies on a wall with a certain thickness, and it all comes down to, I think, what you're trying to achieve is if you change something out because it's broken, you can't just go and buy something different. You've got to buy something which works within the parameters of the wall type that you've got, because it's the wall that prevents the damper from failing, because it is a supporting construction. And that's the bit in my experience we get wrong in every job. We build the walls wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And just to reinforce that, this is something that I've been talking with Joe Celia about as well. And also it's an issue, just to a slight tangent, the way BIM models are created. Yeah, because the typical way that a BIM model would be created for an internal partition wall would be to use a single element, a single family, and then use annotation to differentiate the different sections. And therefore, you would not, within the BIM data itself, be able to differentiate between a 60-minute and a 30-minute property. It would be, it's not, this isn't the proper way that BIM models are created, but I'm talking about the practicality of people that are on a budget as to what they do. And therefore, this is something that we're trying to identify as being the way of doing it. Often wall thicknesses and wall properties are defined as just in a finisher schedule. Whereas we actually,
no, they are.
Yeah, we need it to be more explicit than that.
Okay,
Yeah.
Right, let's press on with question 2. Where is question 2? I can't remember what it is. There we go. What information?
Now, this is the one that you're quite right, Paul, that we need to identify this. We need to break these out into the difference between fire stopping and indeed the different types of fire stopping, because you've got collars, you've got different types of products, haven't you? You've then got things like the dampers and the partitioning. They're all going to be different elements. So this is, if you like, a brain dump of things that we ought to be including. And it's probably going to be, there's an additional piece of work, I think, probably that people like Paul White could help with on, for example, dampers, to say, right, what attributes do we have against a damper? That where this is coming from is that there is no standardized set of information, properties, attributes that we have across the industry. And that's where I'm trying to get to. Yeah. There's IFC information, there's information from MBS, there's information from CIBSI, but none of them are comprehensive or consistent enough. And that's one of the things that I'd like to be able to get to be able to say against a fire damper, what information explicitly do we want to hold against a fire damper? So that's the journey that we're on.
Yeah. I mean, George, from that point of view, if you can send me all the ones that you've got from those various different organisations, I'm more than happy to go through those and tell you which ones are right and come down with a common list.
That I'd be very grateful for that. And in fact, what we're doing, we've got obviously we're looking at this through the residential sector, and in particular housing associations and social landlords. And we've got a project underway with the Housing Association Data Group, where we've created this entity called the Housing Association Data Group, and we've got several people looking at different asset types. And it would be great if you could contribute to that. We've actually got the work that we're doing with the BRE is actually providing a tool to actually do that. So the other data set is from the builders merchants and the electrical and mechanical merchants. It's a data set from an international organisation called ETIM. So I'll definitely involve you and anybody else in this group that wants to get involved in that. That would be fantastic. Thank you.
I also think if you're talking to the people you said, sorry, the housing associations, the area that they're going to be more interested in and the area that they're going to be more at risk in is smoke control. So you really need to bring that up with them, and it's a whole different smoke. I won't give you the full lecture, but please.
Yeah, let's get back to question 2 if you don't mind.
Yeah. Okay, but just be aware of that, because that's the main issue.
Sure.
Absolutely. Okay, question 2. You've all had a look through the answers. Anything glaringly missing from that listing?
Not missing again, but approved for use in mixed penetrations. I think, and then you say IEGC TROX. I think it's a bit further up than that.
Scroll up just there.
There you go. It's just at the top there. It was. Anyway. Yeah. I'm not sure that any duct or damper is approved for use in mixed penetrations. There's no testing yet, because I've been working on the group where we've been trying to define a test for that. So I don't
say
think
that just it starts has damper manufacturer.
So maybe put a question mark against that.
Yeah, put a question mark.
At the moment, the rule is do not mix dampers, ducts, and pipes and cables. Do not do it. There is no test evidence.
And I know what's in Trox's book. I've seen it, but I wouldn't rely upon it. It should be at the minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, good one, good one. Anybody else? Anybody else got an amendment or an addition to that listing? Martin, any thoughts?
I've only added what people have spoken previously, that the base material, surrounding material to which it is attached is the key point there.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Or do we think we've got that covered?
Have we got the direction of fire on there as well? Or has that been missed?
I don't recall seeing that actually.
Okay.
Could you explain what you mean by that, Paul? How would that be expressed in terms of a?
It's within the classifications. You've got, some dampers were originally tested one way, not the other, and
Yes.
there's a bit around. Sorry, I mean I've been down a rabbit hole. That's why I know Paul fairly well, because I've dragged him in a couple with me. But I think, that I mean, I can send some stuff out after this, Jules, just on some of these bits as well. I don't mind sharing everything that I basically do within limits, because at least then you can see. Because I think, not trying to blame the point, I think they're all so different, all of these different categories and how the fields work, that I think if you mix them all together, unless you break them out, you risk confusing people even more with it.
No, we definitely want to do that. And
yeah. I'm not criticising, by the way. I don't want to be too heavy on the first meeting. Sorry, so I do apologise to everyone.
No, not at all. In fact, I was on a meeting first thing this morning where, in fact, Mace are involved in it. But it's where we're being asked to provide the attribute information that is needed, and actually the number of different attributes that are fundamentally different for different asset types is something that most people just don't appreciate. And it's so important, that we are adequately explicit for each of the different asset types. So I'm absolutely on board with what you said, Paul.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, so same question. Anybody else got anything they want to add or subtract or amend? If not, if we're happy with that listing as it is, I'm going to close it down and we'll move on to question 3. George, do you want to introduce question 3?
Yes. Yeah. So where we're trying to get to with this is to actually have something that is adequately a checklist, as it were, that can be used to support a competent person that's actually carrying out the work, or a person that's employing a competent person, so that they can be aware of what to expect that competent person to actually be doing. And that might sound overkill, but what we've discovered, a lot of the work we do is in PFI hospitals, and the level of scrutiny of the maintenance activity that is carried out is becoming really important, because they have to be able to evidence the fact that they've provided every possible support to the engineer that's actually carrying out the work, that it's done properly. And that's why people are using SFG 20 so extensively as a checklist. So what we're trying to do, SFG 20 is great, but it's not all encompassing. There's certainly elements that asset types that we've identified that aren't covered in it. And also it's only really for maintenance and to some extent inspection. Whereas what we need to do is also have a similar type of checklist for installation, commissioning, and decommissioning. So that's really what we're trying to get to here, if that's possible. So these golden rules are ones that Joe Cilia has provided.
And so these come from the EdCast Beezer book, Jules. They're like the part 3 and 4 Pacific. So I'd probably, you know, again, probably not trying to lane the point. If I give you an example for, say, fire dampers, you'd sort of say always check the building movement and tolerance, because a damper doesn't pick up deflection. Generally, the structure does. There is some deflection head dampers on the market, but generally the wall picks up the deflection. So you can end up with 250, 300 mil deflection heads, which doesn't you know, get accounted for. You know, things like you know, say always make sure the appropriate contractor is responsible for the penetration seal, because you know a lot of fire rated duct doesn't need a fire stopping company, because again it's a penetration seal. So they're slightly different. I mean, is it? I don't know how you want to tackle that one.
Can I just ask Paul, that point that you made about deflection?
Yeah.
Is that something that we ought to have as the as one of the information sets that we need in the asset?
Yeah, I think, Joe, what I'm going to do is I've got a flow chart that we use for sort of thinking about all of this stuff early on for ducts and dampers and stuff.
Yeah.
And I should be able to sort of send a copy of it over. I'm using it for something else as well, but I don't think it's going to be a problem because most people have got it anyway. But it talks about deflection and things you need to consider.
But
yeah.
Great, thank you. So,
Paul, can I just ask you? Would you just put me a quick sentence on deflection into the chat for question 2? Would you mind?
Yeah, of course I can. Yeah, no problems at all.
Thank you.
It's a big one.
It just means we don't miss it. That's
that's fine.
I've not come across that one before, so that's a really helpful one.
Yeah, absolutely.
In part 3, it's not so bad because you know the market's gone away and tested soft seals, which are like an 80 kg product over a 140. But in dampers and ductwork, that the test is, I mean, Paul, you can shoot me down in flames if you want, but it's so prescriptive. Essentially, testing a 4-sided hull. And as soon as you go into a flexible wall, the fire safety of the flexible wall kicks in. So if you look at how BGs can happen Senate build a wall, as soon as you've got 25 or 30 mil deflection, you end up with a 250, 60 mil deflection head for the fire safety of the wall. And that's something that no one takes account for, which is why everything goes down on sites. Or in the case of people doing 3-side approaches on site, but they're not tested with a deflection head in there, so it's not right. This is the kind of stuff that gets missed, you know. So
This is very important.
I'll do a thing now on it, mate. Hold on.
Thank you. I appreciate that because it's too important for us to miss.
I've been doing some work with Paul on that anyway, but also there are various checklists certainly for dampers, and they would probably be good for dampers and to an extent fire resisting ductwork if that's applied here. There are lists available, and I'll dig those out.
That would be great. Just to interpose on that, we are actually setting up a separate information source called BIM for Housing Black Box, and within that is a resource section. So any documentation or listings, as you just said, Paul, that you can send over for us to include in that will be gratefully received.
The principal idea behind the black box, everybody, is to really use it as a way of capturing experiences so that they can then be, if you like, shared, and you can draw on those going forward. And the principle is coming at it from the point of, you know, it's called black box because that's the way the airline industry works. And if we can start to identify on a basis where things go wrong, then we can start to potentially engineer those problems out of the process. That's the intention of it. Okay, can we scroll down?
Just if you scroll down. Okay. Right, so the usual question, has anybody got anything they'd like to add, subtract or amend on that listing for question 3?
I think
Mustafa, we haven't heard from you. Have you any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just listening. Hello. I'm just not very knowledgeable about these things. I thought I'd listen.
Okay, that's no problem. You're very welcome to listen. Emma, I keep calling you and you're missing.
No, I'm here. I'm listening. And,
Have you got any thoughts, Emma?
No, I haven't. Thank you very much. Like I said in my email, my LinkedIn message, this is a great way to do this if people are inputting before, because it's so comprehensive and helps us all to see if there's anything that's missing ahead of the session. So thank you, George.
Brilliant.
Excellent. Thank you, Emma.
I think to add in what Paul was saying there about checking the deflection. So there's two elements to it. There's knowing whether the deflection is in the asset type, which is question 2. But I think we need to for example, I've put in there an example from SFG 20. So what we've got there is the testing procedure from SFG 20 and also the maintenance procedure. But the interesting thing from what Paul's saying there, checking the deflection is probably something that they wouldn't think of doing, because it's not actually the damper itself that's being checked. It's actually the context. And I think that's a fantastic point, that you've got something else that's affected it. And in fact, actually, on reflection, we ought to also add that into 1A, because that's something.
Well, 1B is in a way, isn't it? Because it affects the performance of the asset.
Yeah, that's what I meant. 1B. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, Joel, I know I'm obviously late into the group. I mean, one of the things to consider, because I have to deal with procurement as well. So, and this is in the right context. I'm not throwing architecture under the bus, right? But architects do not design flexible walls. They do line and linear. So when you look at what you're saying in BIM, you'll get as you say, a block. And that block, you don't know whether it's 2 layers of board and a 70mm stud. You don't know what it is. And the problem is things like dampers and ductwork rely on the thickness and the aperture thickness, and also the layers of board within that wall for their fire testing to be correct when you install it on site, because you've got to install as in practice as tested. So when you look at it in context, is that if a big construction company like Mace goes away and procures the MEP contractor to go and buy all the kit and do all the builder's work holes, they're doing it in isolation of understanding what deflection is, how a wall's built correctly, what the thickness of the walls are are required for the detail. And it ends up that when the drywall contractors are appointed later on, it all then comes out the woodwork. And this is why you get absolute crap quality on sites with some of these installation details, because the way that things were being procured. You understand what I mean? Is that an architect can understand from a white book a thickness of a wall? I wouldn't really necessarily trust them to put a door in it, 16 different apertures, and get the spacing right between all of them, or they're still channeling correct. It's not their bag, is it?
Don't shoot down all architects.
No, I'm not throwing them under the bus. You need to give them support as a builder. That's what we found. So that's why don't shoot me down as well. Sorry.
Where's Audrey when you need her?
No, it's just to explain. I think, if you go back pre-2005 when building control, FPI and all of that, the reliance before these prescriptive test standards were there, architects could probably do it. But the world we live in now, when everything's so prescriptive about what's being tested by BG, CNAF or CINIAT, you can't expect them to do it. You need to give them all the detail and the support, because one affects the other and vice versa. It's quite.
I think it's quite useful that you could go back onto competency here, because it's really important. I mean, again, the expectation that architects have full competency for these specialist sectors is completely
it's wrong. It's completely wrong.
It's completely wrong.
It's unfair.
They need the support of the specialists with the knowledge to make informed decisions. So it's a really good point here.
Sorry, just briefly going back to the prior page on the document. One of the things that doesn't seem to be included in that first list there, down a bit again, sorry. There's nothing mentioned there about the installation of the product in the first list, and that should be included in that list. If somebody's going to go around and do all these checks, they're just functional tests. But if it's installed wrongly, then it doesn't matter whether this works or not, really.
No, definitely. What I definitely want is a list of the things that you need to watch out for in terms of installation.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe even ahead of that, you know, what should the manufacturer's checklist be? You know, so going.
Oh yeah,
right,
I understand that, George, and I'll give you that. I'm just saying that list basically says you've done a testing and reporting procedure, but you haven't looked at how it was installed, and that's a fundamental point.
Paul, that's just somebody's sent those points in, and
I understand. I just thought I'd better make the point though, because
but they're not. Then it's not. We've not broken it out into any kind of order.
Yeah.
So can I just clarify, because it's me that put that in. That is SFG 20s. That's an extract from SFG 20s testing and the maintenance procedure. So you're right that it's not even commissioning. I would say it's testing once it's been installed.
That's right. Yeah, but you can't. They should be looking at the installation as well. I'm quite shocked by that.
When you who would be doing that?
Who would be, well, if they're going around and doing this, if it's not installed properly, there's no point in doing this.
I see what you mean. So a maintenance person, when they are doing their 6 monthly maintenance,
yeah,
they should be checking to make sure it's been installed properly.
Yes.
Got it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, no, sorry, I misunderstood you as well. Yeah, could you do me a favour, Paul, and just write a sentence for just to shove in there so we don't miss it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose
anybody else?
That then becomes the question, Paul, as to how would, you know, what would that maintenance person do to do that inspection?
Well, and then we get back into the whole competency issue. So it's all very well doing a mechanical check. Anybody can lift a bonnet and check everything's there. Fundamentally, they don't know whether it meets the rules or not. And if they don't know, then you really need to do something about it. And the other point is it might be that it's damaged around the outside. So I don't like to use it, but the installation method, the fire stopping that's used might have been chipped away, or it's not been installed properly, or any of those, and that's not covered here, and I'm quite shocked.
Well, I think you're right. Ian,
yeah, hi. So I've been quite quiet because I'm new to the group, so just sort of listening a bit, but picking up on what Paul was saying, but surely it should have been commissioned properly in the first place, so that's not maintenance. So if it's not been installed correctly, there are big issues about things not being designed and installed correctly, but surely that's the stage before, and at the maintenance stage you shouldn't be having that discussion, or I mean, obviously if it's badly wrong, someone should notice it, but the detail of that should have been done in the installation commissioning phase, not in the maintenance phase.
Sorry, can I just briefly respond to that? Yeah, Ian, I understand what you're saying. And if it was a new building, I think you might be lucky, but we have a whole load of stuff out there that really
exactly isn't. It's existing buildings, isn't it?
It's already existing stuff. There's literally tens of thousands out there that are probably not installed properly.
10 years worth, Paul. I would say at least 10 years worth.
I'd say at least that.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else?
You put your hand up, David. Was there anything you were going to say?
I was going to make the same point as Ian. I mean, I work on the new build side of life these days. So if it's maintenance people that are picking this up, then it's too late. You know, it should have been checked before then. But no, I respect the point that this is absolutely about existing buildings as it is new buildings.
I think what we want to do is have a 360 view on these things, so that the person that's actually going to do the maintenance should be there should be a process and a conduit where they can report back the sorts of things anyway. Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that, George. Actually, I think although the focus may be on existing buildings, I mean, I think the transition from new build and capex to opex scenarios is really critical, and that loss of information from that sort of disconnect between front end teams and back end teams can lead to significant problems. So definitely something to address.
Cool, thank you. Okay, press on.
Okay, anyone else? Anyone else got anything they want to add, subtract, or amend on that listing? If not, we can close it off and move on to question 4, which I know you're all dying to get to. It's about competency. It's one of our more lively sections. Okay, just so let's close off question 3 and move into question 4. There we go. Well, competency training should be in place. That's quite broad, isn't it? We've got some input already on that, which you've all seen. So I will go to Paul White as a start point.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on, I'm there. Just a moment. I've just lost everybody. Right, there we go. We just in the background to this, we're doing some work through ADCAS on looking at their installer schemes, and that's also going to cover the installation of dampers. And there is a level of training that we're aiming that people would follow as well, and that's sort of in process. So I can't really give it to you at the moment, but just to let you know, it's there. There are now, I understand, either in place or going to be in place very, very soon, national occupational standards for the installation of fire dampers. And there is unfortunately only one course available at the moment that's there, but there is a course that's now available and underwritten by UCAS and CITB, and again might lead to card carrying members and all the rest of it, of those sorts of requirements. So a lot of this work is ongoing.
Paul, just to interrupt, was this in your email?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Right. So we got it. I'm really sorry about that.
I put some notes at the top of the email, and then I responded to the points further down. So maybe you missed it. So
no, that's great.
And then in the Smoke Control Association, again, we now have a third-party installer certification scheme, and we're working. Excuse me. We're working on the competencies that need to go with that. It's all of this is cart before the horses. I think we know, because nobody ever realised they needed it. But if we don't start, then it won't get there. So I think the requirement's going to come before the ability to be able to get it. But again, hopefully, if there's a requirement, then that will generate people actually providing the services.
Can I just interpose something there? Just so everybody's, I know George mentioned it earlier, but along with, in the document that we produce, we're calling it a document. It's going to be online and it's going to be dynamic in that it will be amended, changed, added to on an ongoing basis. Will never be finished. But within that, we'll call it a document. There is an appendix which has your comments, your points that are not answering the questions, but are adjacent or important points that need to be made and considered. So nothing's wasted or lost.
Yeah, what we're trying to do, Paul, is to put the answers to the questions in a form that we can then put into software applications, for example, to inform decision making. And then for also, because one of the concerns that we've got is that this whole process is generating a plethora of documents. You know, I saw one that had been issued last Thursday, which has come out of the HSE, which is a 30 or 40 page document that explains what ought to go into a safety case report. And it's great, but it's a hell of a lot, you know, to read and consume. And we're probably getting 2 of those a week. And
George, I could not agree more. I'm sorry, you're going to get me on my soapbox now, because the amount of information that we've all got to read and keep it up to date with. You know, I've just created a building safety case, and now I've got this 40-page document to match it to. You know, we're all being asked to not wait and get on with this, and we're all doing things, and as you do them, information is being released and you're then having to change things, and it's great. I mean, it's the biggest change in the sector, isn't it? But sorry, I just wanted to say here.
Yeah.
And the point is, if we can try and organize this in a way that is more standardized, then it means that when you answer the question, let's say, for example, on the point Paul's made earlier on smoke control, there's probably things that are generic about smoke control that could be applied to 10 different asset types. And therefore, if you can answer the questions and get that information organized properly, then there's also going to be other information that's needed for different asset types regarding smoke, but some of the questions and some of the answers are going to be quite common. So if we can try and organize the information properly, we've got a much better chance of people consuming it. I think all too often in the BIM world, you end up with an AIR and a employers' information requirements or whatever, which is maybe 200 or 300 pages. You know, nobody stands a chance of interpreting all of that. All it is a way of passing risk. And what we're trying to do is say, how can we then make that more consumable and properly reusable?
I understand what you're saying is also, but what you tend to find is less is less sometimes, and you need to be careful because you need people doing this who are competent. And if people think they're competent and they're not, then that is the biggest problem, because I'll tell you what, they outnumber everybody 100 to 1 on that basis.
Yeah, it's proving and demonstrating that, though, isn't it? That's kind of, I think, what this question is really all about. It's all right that somebody's qualified to do this or qualified to do that, but what does that actually mean? We had a very good example with cavity barriers, I think it was. Somebody'd been trained to and qualified to install a cavity barrier. On site, they go on site, hand over their card. Yes, they're qualified to install a cavity barrier. Go to install the cavity barrier. It's not one they've ever seen before. They weren't qualified in that cavity barrier. It was a different cavity barrier.
And that's something that we've drawn out from the previous sessions, actually. There's a competency and training at an industry level. And then there's additional training needed for the individual product, the manufacturer's product. And therefore, we need to recognise both of those. Paul Oakley.
Yeah, so we're back to one of my favourite subjects, actors. So basically, at the moment, you just really have the manufacturers and the installers, but you know, there are specifiers, there are maintainers, there are transporters. It's defining these sets of actors, and then each of those would have a specific competency set against those. So the focus here seems to be basically about the competencies only on the manufacturers and the installers, but there's other people involved in the system that need to be picked up.
I think that's a really good point. If you're talking about competency, it goes right down the line, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It only is the old weakest link thing, isn't it?
Just to add, I think just in the experience that we have at the moment, just in this side of the construction, is that if you, because I dealt with the early adopters, probably like some of you did as well, is that my biggest point was that if you don't allow for the fire detailing at the start, then suddenly, you get to, to contract stage of a builder, then all this deflection comes out of the woodwork. Everything you had drawn, this is what MEP consultants will do, because they're not, no respect to them, they're not experts on how dampers are tested. All tight to the slab are suddenly, 300 odd mil below the top of the ceiling. And fundamentally, the building doesn't work. Then you put in the pressure back on, get the fire stopper in to solve the problem, who is actually the wrong person for dampers because they do part 3. We see this sort of shindigs going on all the time on jobs at the moment, which have been through planning in the last sort of 2 or 3 years.
Sorry, Paul Oakley, could I just ask you to put a quick sentence in the chat for me on your point?
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
Could I just
go on, somebody else?
Yeah, I was just going to ask a question. I was talking with Howell from at Sibsey on Friday, and Howell made the point that one of the most important parts of and really, I think it's reinforced what was just said. That design is a very important part of fire stopping, and it's just occurred to me just in that conversation. How we'll be looking at things probably from a building services engineer's design perspective, but when we talk about the design of fire stopping, would that be done by the M&E consultant, or would it be done by the architect, or would it be done even by a structural consultant?
George, do you want to answer that? Because I can tell you straight away. Anyone else jump in as well? Because I know I'm talking quite a bit here. Is that if you think of it this way, the building in construction, let's talk about procurement. Just generally, we'll hire the building services, engineers and the subcontractor to draw it all out before drywall's involved, or before brick and block works involved, or the fire stoppers even appointed. We have changed that, but a lot of people haven't. So then they're thinking the architect who has never built a drywall in their life, no disrespect to architects who do not understand, everything that BG want, all the different distances between doors and surface penetrations and deflection heads, who can't really draw that. So by the time that dry lining contractor is on board and fire stopping, that horse has well and truly bolted. And that lies the current problem in the industry. So when you look at it on competency, you need to have the right horse for the right course on at the right time. So you've got to have a damper supplier, because they all make different products that are only applicable for certain circumstances. It's the old knowing the tomatoes are fruit, we're not putting in your fruit salad argument. It's one of them. What trucks make might not be suitable for something that advanced air action air make for a certain sort of hull. So you've got to have that knowledge of what you're buying.
So what are you saying? More specialisation, Paul? Do you think the industry needs to be more granular?
I think there's 2 things you need to do. Is one is that traditional procurement, and this all comes from client side as well, is that you'll have a PQS, no disrespect to them, who wants to get the cost plan down to say £400 a square foot for resi, or maybe 350, whatever they're looking at. Then it goes out to the market for cost advice. But all the time, this job's going through planning with no detailing involved. Where's it going to end up? You're going to end up with services designs which are drawn to, to technical design at 4A, which don't take due account of deflection heads and spacings in walls, because that's a specialist function of CDP from a drywall company, a damper supplier, or a fire rate and smoke control company. Horse is bolted, it will not fit. That's where you kind of sit.
So this is really interesting in that what Howell was obviously not pushing, that's wrong. He was obviously promoting the role of the M&E consultant in that process. But just thinking about what you just said there, the majority of the work, in my experience, the majority of building services that are installed do not follow what the M&E consultant has specified. The work is, even when there's a coordinated BIM model, that would typically be done by the installation contractor, and they wouldn't use the M&E consultant's model. That's my practical experience.
Yeah.
So therefore, actually, when Howell is saying that the fire stopping would be designed or should be designed, presumably by an M&E consultant, that wouldn't actually work in reality, because the decision as to what pipes are going through, or exactly where that pipe is going through, would be done by not even the M&E installer. No. As you're saying, it would be the fire stopping subcontractor
in conjunction with them.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And every system's different. So what FSI make, or Hilti or Rockwell, they've all got different requirements. They're not all the same. So, you know, if you look at it in BG6 terms, because I do know how fairly well, I mean, you look at it in this sort of context, is that in BG6, you're supposed to get rid of all critical clashes. My argument is I don't think you can do it anyway, because MEP consultants don't make fire dampers. They don't make fire-rated ductwork, and they do not design drywall. And when you look at the drywall industry, they don't make dampers. And when you look at the damper industry, they don't make drywall. And that's the risk, and that is the issue really of having all direct fields of application to test standards that all go back to the same test procedure under EN. Everyone's just testing their part. And I mean, Paul, you're going about this, Mr. White, is that getting the damper manufacturers to open their eyes to walls. I think you'll always struggle to do it, because they just want to get, you know, they send it to a lab to be tested, and they go, "What do you want, a Group A, B, or C wall?" I just want 120-minute damper. That's what they get. And you can't install it in anything because the wall thickness is too big in the test.
Ian's got his hand up.
Sorry. Yeah, Ian.
Yeah. So if I could sort of pick up exactly what Paul was saying, that we're specialist designers and installers of smoke ventilation systems, smoke control systems, and that's exactly the problem we find, that we get all these bits where a consultant has specified something, but we've actually got to make a system that works.
Yeah.
And we've got to cover all of those aspects, and we find the space isn't there, things don't fit, we can't coordinate things. And so the specialist knowledge to actually make the whole system work from a smoke ventilation point of view is where we struggle, because we end up having to pick up what has been allowed for or done by people who aren't specialists. And they got something that may be generally right, or maybe, frankly, a long way away, and you know, it may be specified by architects or consultants, but they're not specialists, so they don't get those details right. And when you actually build it and try and make it work, those details have got to be right. There's nowhere to go then.
When you've done that, Ian, am I right to say that's unlikely to go back into a 3D model?
Well, how that information gets back into the model, it depends what sort of contract from our point of view, what we be working on, and who's doing that sort of coordination. But from a BIM point of view, that's normally someone else is doing that with information that we would supply.
That's exactly what I thought. Yeah. So in practice, to fulfill your function, I'm not suggesting, by the way, that this information should go back into the 3D model, and we can have a separate conversation on that with that. I'm just intrigued, you know, I'm just trying to understand what you're likely to use, and broadly, for your purpose, for you delivering what you need to do, you don't actually need it to be in a 3D model.
So we don't need it in the 3D model?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that for your purposes, for what you're doing, you'd be using information that was already in a 3D model, but for your purposes to carry out what you've got to do, there's no necessity from your perspective to put it back into a 3D model. That's a question, sorry.
Sorry, do we personally get any value from putting it back into the 3D model? Obviously, there's going to be maintenance further down the line and so on and so on. So I think it would be fair to say that it is limited in terms of it tends to be contractual more than of value. But then you've got to coordinate your models anyway. So somewhere down the line, you know, if it doesn't go back in the 3D model, something else crops up somewhere else down the line, which is the old age-old coordination problem that we're trying to get round with BIM.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is just understand what data, forget the 3D geometry, as it were. I'm just talking about the data. What we're going to be doing with this, we're trying to define what information is needed, irrespective of how it's going to be stored. But I'm sorry if I've probably deflected it. Mike.
Okay, Mike.
Right, this is a brilliant conversation. It's one that sort of starts to make my ears ring. As a BIM manager, what I find on most of these things is absolutely everything that you guys have just discussed in the last 5 minutes is all about what BIM should be about, covering all of these aspects. But what's interesting about the challenge of this is that what this leads to is, as you said earlier on, George, is very large documents with lots of information within them, which then becomes the Achilles heel of actually them being run through. So, you know, we've talked about responsibility matrices. Well, those are key documents, and you can allocate who's responsible for all of these things. You can talk about task information delivery plans and all of these documents and terminologies and things which BIM is about. But it leads to very big, complicated documents that then take considerable time to process and digest, and procurement programs that typically don't allow for all those things to happen in a sensible manner. It's a big animal, this.
It is, and one of the things that we're working on is making all of that information more machine readable, so that you can actually build that into a master information delivery plan, for example. Should be structured in a data schema, which then different software applications can use. So the common data environment, for example, should be reading from that that master information delivery plan and the AIR to then automatically validate to see whether that information has been provided. Unfortunately, that's not the way it is at the moment, but that's the journey that we're on.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Just picking up on, I think one of was it Ian was just talking about modelling information, and again, that's something that we regularly have challenges with. Supply chain and specialist advisors are able to provide us information, but quite often they don't have information to be able to populate models with, which contain useful information that can then flood through to all those data sets and information. So there's still a requirement from a supply chain end, and also quite importantly from a client end, actually making sure that they ask for the right information right at the onset of projects.
Can I just get us back to the question? We're talking about competency. I think a lot of what we've been talking about now is very interesting, very valuable, but it's possibly more appropriate in the next section when we get to talking about change management, because we can expand that out into exactly where the information is. So in terms of competency, has anybody got anything they want to add to what is already there? We've all forgotten the question, haven't we? I had to look.
I think
sorry.
Go on, Paul.
I was just going to say one of the things that I'm trying to do with the ADCAS and the Smoke Control Association documents I'm working on is actually show who needs to be competent at any given stage, and I'm trying to include in the designer, the possibly the architect, the building control officer, because there's no point in presenting this
presumably what they need to be competent in.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Yeah. So I'm trying to develop tables like that.
Brilliant.
And it is interesting, and I suppose it's back to the next bit, which is I'm only aware that there's 3 different BIM models at the moment. There's the architect, there's the designer, and then there's a contractor, and they don't talk because the people at the top don't know what to put in the model, and it's populated by the third people in the queue who are solving a problem, not solving a design, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Can contribute to that, Paul, just to make that clearer, not even clearer, just to reinforce it. On most projects we're involved with, we have between 25 and 40 BIM models. Not 3, because each work package typically has its own model. And what we need to do is to federate those different models. You've then got all the information that isn't modeled, which can be delivered as COBie outputs. It doesn't have to be modeled. So you've got, you know, on a job, we're just doing a university complex in Dublin at the moment. There's 87 work packages, and there are, I think, 35 BIM models. So yes, I'm just reinforcing the point. It's Paul.
I was just going to. Oh, sorry. Who's going? George, you go first, mate. Go on. Sorry.
No. I'm telling him off for taking over my chair.
Sorry. I thought I couldn't see a George on there. I was actually looking for it as well.
No, go Paul.
No, I was just going to make Mike Smith laugh and say, well, as long as they get the zoning right at the start of the process, you're laughing, Mike. Yeah. Not that I know that much about BIM, but I know enough about it that if they don't do that, it's all hell bent on going south anyway.
Mike, is your hand up again, or is that from last time?
Sorry, no, lowered.
Okay,
sorry,
no worries.
sorry. Just make Mike laugh.
Okay, who have we heard from for a while? Ian. Anything more on this one? Are you happy with what everyone said? We're just talking competency and training.
Yeah, I mean, competency is a very difficult one, and we're working on quite a few things that we've pulled on with some of the associations and so on. And it's such a difficult one, competency, and at what level and at what stage, because you know we've got people focusing on the people delivering on site, but then if it's not been designed right in the first place because there's a lack of skill and expertise in that area, then it doesn't matter what you deliver on site. So it's how you address all the levels.
Absolutely. So I think from what Paul White said he was doing, that's is absolutely the route, isn't it? You've got to define it at a very granular level, exactly who's got to have what competency and when, and how do you prove it? Which of course is the next bit, which is the third party assessors and who assesses the assessors.
And the weakness of not having people doing assessments who are assessing the assessors who know less than the people they're assessing sometimes.
Absolutely.
And you've got the ridiculous, it can be absolutely ridiculous sometimes that you've got people doing assessments who are very genuine, but they just don't have the level.
There was a fire risk assessor who was on the workshop a few weeks ago for when he was talking about fire doors, and he went on a NEBOSH training course a few years ago, and what he said was that he finished the course, and the requirement was then for him to go off and do a fire risk assessment and then submit it back to NEBOSH for approval. And he did that and he passed it. And then he thought, how do they know it was me that did that? Yeah. Also, how did they know that? Because they didn't visit the site with him, so they don't actually know whether he picked up everything he was supposed to pick up. But he's got his NEBOSH qualification.
Which is very scary, isn't it, really, if you think about it? Very, very scary. We can sit here talking about assets, but if you've got a fire risk assessor who doesn't know what they're doing, it's kind of an issue, isn't it? Emma?
Sorry, Georgia, I wouldn't say that course would quantify somebody to be a fire risk assessor. I put my health and safety manager on it, not a fire risk assessor. That course is to give someone an overview of fire safety, really, and the practical task is to do the fire risk assessment. I mean, honestly, like I said, I certainly wouldn't employ somebody with just that as a fire risk assessor.
Okay, cool.
Paul White.
Yeah, I mean, this is very difficult because I suppose officially I'm not competent because I can't give you any certificates about anything that I know. I just hope that I know it well enough. But I've been on a couple of courses and then they wouldn't be necessarily how I would have run them, and they don't have anywhere near enough information as far as I'm concerned. And I think your point is that I kind of, at least I know what I don't know. And I'll be honest enough to admit that. And
we had a very interesting discussion actually in the first tranche of meetings about how to pass on and evaluate acquired knowledge, because you get these old guys who've been knocking around for 50 years and they know more than anyone else. But how do you pass it on? And it's the age-old story, isn't it? How do you? And the answer is usually you don't. Okay, anybody else? Ian, your hand up.
Just sort of 10% of that and pick it up. That it's all very well doing the training, and it's important that people do the training, but then it's about the experience. But there's also, you've got to temper that with, there's a lot of people that have been doing it for 50 years that have been doing it wrong for 50 years.
That's also true. Yes.
And so you've got to be really, really careful about people. Just because people talk a lot and they've been doing it a long time doesn't actually mean that they know what they're talking about. It's just that no one else has ever challenged them.
Or they perhaps knew what they were talking about 50 years ago, but it's changed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And things have moved on, technology's moved on. I mean, especially, with controls and things like this, it's a completely different game to, when I started doing it. And you have to move on. And so you need training to keep people updated. CPD, all of these things are so important. And the concept of competence, like we say, is, it's not just a one-term thing, is it? So
I think that's really where I'm coming from, Ian, with the point about the checklists, because it's critical that we've got people that are trained, competent, but we can't be completely reliant on that. Good.
Okay. I think we've pretty much exhausted that, if everybody agrees, and we can move on to question 5. Any naysayers on that? I'm taking that as an...
There is one thing I would just add, and that is that we're working on a large Innovate UK project with Lang O'Rourke, and one of the partners on that is an organisation that you may come across. I'd recommend them if you haven't, called Dynamic Knowledge, and they Debbie Carlton heads it up. But she's advising MHCLG on competency. She's a specialist in this whole area, and she's also working with DirectWorks and ACAS on their training schemes as well. So I just thought I'd mention Dynamic Knowledge as a bit of a plug for.
Okay, let's move on to question 5. Which is around change management. George, you want to introduce this one briefly? Actually, you don't have to be too brief. We're in good time.
Yeah, so this is one of the areas that I think is so important. And it's an interesting one in that I was talking to a manufacturer last week, and he said, well, the whole thing about the golden thread is about change management. Yeah, and I said, well, you're quite right that that's part of it, but it isn't the only part. But I do agree with him that what he's frustrated about is what happens in the industry is that he'll work with designers to come up with a solution to a particular problem. They'll innovate around it, they'll invest quite a lot of time and effort, and then when it goes out to procurement, he gets swapped out for an alternative product that may or may not meet that specification. So I've spent a lot of time really looking at how, let's say, an MBS specification is put together. I've sat down with architects who have used the MBS spec to be able to come up with what that performance is. And actually, when you look at what that is, it requires a lot of interpretation by people, and the only way really of doing it is to go to a manufacturer to see whether that particular specification can be met by a certain product. And it's that type of cyclical thing that Paul's been talking about earlier that is important. So what we therefore need to do, in my view, is to have something where there's a rigorous change management process. I don't think we're going to get I don't think we're going to go back to a situation where a designer specifies everything. I think it's a designer will probably recommend things, but then we need a robust way of making sure that when something is proposed, I can see the flashlights.
Yeah, can I just interrupt there? It was an interesting point somebody made, actually. I think it's in question 5 somewhere in the notes, that designers are very wary about recommending anything for legal reasons and fees and goodness knows what else. That there is actually they're not actually always very comfortable with that.
Okay, I think I've probably said enough now. I think, Mike, you were the first to put your hand up.
Yeah, okay. Where do we start on this one? This has probably got lots of different directions it could take.
Take one.
Let's go for starting off early designs. I think Paul earlier on has mentioned it a couple of times about how design processes go and about how the involvement of specialists can come at different stages. And again, it probably runs very parallel with how we would specify things. So you're dead right. I mean, for us, clarity at the onset is so helpful if we know whether we are performance specifying an object or actually naming a specific product. It helps us significantly early on in projects. We very rarely get clarity on that, if we're honest. So some things we know are being named and we can go with a product and we can engage, and other things we don't. And like you say, we get a lot of challenges then if we invest a huge amount of time with a company, only for that company then to be value engineered out because somebody else comes along with a specialist. So that is a really significant thing. The new BSR requirements, which if they come into force from April of next year, I think will significantly help that for projects and buildings that come under its focus. Now, as we understand it, what will happen there is you will get a building regulations approval for detailed specification requirements on all elements of work. And should you then change or vary a product, you have to resubmit your building regs application. Now, that puts a huge emphasis on getting your building regulations applications correct, and also puts a big timeline in your program for addressing those concerns. So value engineering or change management of objects will be significantly more time embargo to make sure it goes through a more rigorous process. Now, I can't see there being many changes then post building regs, because the impact would be on prelims and costs for, you know, construction programs if you're waiting for changes to be run through. So it's likely that more time is going to be invested at the detailed design to get it right prior to actually commencing on site.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Paul McSorley.
I'll go Paul White first, because I think Paul's probably going to say some of what I am. So
okay.
Yeah, just to be fair. Sorry, Paul.
Everybody wants to be the chairman, don't they?
Sorry.
So we get too much practice being chairman in other areas, I think.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Which is why we're reasonably
Feel
well
free.
I say reasonably well behaved. I think this is the point. I mean, the key thing that we're talking about here, certainly with ducts, dampers, be there fire or smoke control, there's a very clear classification process. There's a very clear statement in the approved documents that it should be this, and this. And as long as that's specified with a little bit more information, then it's fine. The issue, and this is a bit that Paul's going to say, and I'll chair for him now, is that when it comes down to it, the product is clear. The issue is you can't install this product in that wall, or there's not enough space for this product because it needs too much space, and it's all about the coordination of the services, and I call it space. You know, it's the final frontier. If we put space in for all the services, then we'll be all right. But the problem is that, you know, nobody ever thinks that you've got to run ventilation and pipes and cables round buildings when they design them. And then if you take lettable space, nobody likes that very much. So you get put into smaller and smaller areas, which you can't install the products properly. So unfortunately, it still does come back to, this is the product, that's the performance. What size hole does it need in this type of wall or floor? And that's it. It isn't actually any more complicated than that, but we do make it very, very complicated.
I mean, probably just to add to it, because I'm glad you said that. Well, a bit to add to it is, we're like a tag team here. Sorry, everyone. Is that the classification codes are different. So a smoke control damper is different. I'm going to get it right, Paul, to a low leakage damper, which you might refer to as sometimes an MSFD, but it's a low leakage fire damper. We had this debate recently. The classifications are different. One's got, you know, operational classification, one hasn't. And the thing is, when you look at consultants, and we've had this personally, and Paul's seen it as well, where we're going to a big well-known consultancy, and the first question they're asking is, what is a smoke control damper? And these are the guys that are specifying it. And no disrespect to them, it's just that the world's become so much more complicated. They don't really know what to specify anywhere. They only need something to control smoke, but they'll mix it up with something that prevents smoke going through it. You see where I'm going with this? So you've got that kind of issue in there. And the other thing I think as well to bear in mind is that we have PT slabs now. Compartments, you know, on horizontal have been pushed down to the hilt, especially on resi. These details need space. PT shrinks more, you know, moves more. See where all this is coming from is that when you look at, you know, you said there yourself, Mike, with the building safety regulator, you're not going to change products. What will happen is if they class a product in a spec, and we've had this with LUL recently, saying you must have it to this standard, the fact it isn't drawn to that standard doesn't come up till it's too late. That's the problem. And I think when you look at most of the contracts are design and build, where we are responsible for the adequacy, discrepancy and statutory matters of everything that's been done, including the pre-work of the consultant. If it's drawn wrong at planning, you're going to get a regulator beating you up, as well as, you know, a client with a contract, because things aren't adequately to be installed to statutory compliance. So that's what we're going to kind of find. That's my fear with it. So just give you a bit of insight to that, you know, obviously with PT pushing the buildings down as well.
What's PT again? Sorry.
So post-tension slabs. You gone away from RC PT slabs. It's basically got cable stringers that hold the slabs in place, but they bounce more. If you hear about this creeping building syndrome, you ever heard of it? The buildings creak like ships. It's all to do with PT. Circular buildings are worse, but they twist, and all the kinetic energy comes out the top of the head track. And it does sound like you want a sinking ship.
And it's great because this goes around in that spiraling circle again. Obviously, but decisions being made about the primary structural approach and the primary structural strategies, that then comes back to the types of walls, the deflection heads, the ceiling zones, and you sort of end up with this spiraling challenge.
There you do, and Mike, you said it there yourself. People go, it's a drywall problem. It's not. It's a bloody structural issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it shows itself in the drywall, so therefore it's a drywall problem. Sorry, George, we're digressing a bit.
Well, no, I tell you what's really what's just hit me there is that the structural element, the structural risk element of the building safety case and the golden thread. Nobody's mentioned to me until you've mentioned it this morning, this thing about deflection. But what you've just described there, you and Mike have just been describing there, is about the twisting. And that movement, as it were, is obviously something that structural engineers will have taken into account. But
maybe,
yeah. There's reasons for that. Sorry, Josh.
But it's in our various different conversations on this under the Golden Thread Initiative with other, you know, in fact, the risk group that, you know, is looking at this type of thing hasn't mentioned that at all. So That's a very interesting one. Emma, would you know anything about? Have you heard of that at all with your safety case work?
I haven't actually. I've just written it down to have a little Google of it. I mean, we just write. Like I said, I'm just writing the building safety case for our first building. So just for everybody knows that we've got one building going to be in scope. So we're really fortunate, and we're just like everybody else. We're just fumbling around in the dark trying to put it all together. So no, sorry, I can't add anything there. I'm sorry.
Martin.
Oh, sorry.
Hi there. Yes, structural engineers should have a full briefing of what they should be designing for. We have this particularly with structural timber buildings, where the deflection of those products can interfere with the fire protection significantly. And it should be very much part of the structural engineering's briefing pack, and they should be taking responsibility.
Yeah, so I was going to, what you find with PTs, this is what we found. It's a bit like if you design a bridge and you have 8 different designers, that bridge is going to do one thing, either wobble like the wobbly bridge in London, or it's going to fall down over a period of time. So what we found is with PTs, because what they'll do is, and you are right, Mum, what you're saying, but the PT goes to a third party to design it. And what happens then is all their assumptions on lateral stability don't actually become true. So the thing moves more than it should do. But getting back to your point, Emma, as well, I can't put it on the chat, but I'll send out after this some slides about how you select certain things for fire dampers. It just gives you a bit of a flow chart on what you're looking for. And there's a slide that talks to you about movement, because you've obviously got dead load, you've got live load, and you've got fire load as well. So one thing you should never find is fire dampers installed through steel beams, because there's no test method in the latest way of actually proving that they work. So you have to go below them. And this is a common one we've had on jobs as well, having to, pull those, move stuff away from steel beams, because some of the stuff, if it's painted, will deflect up to like 50 or 60 mil. When they get past malleability of 450, maybe 520, they start to move. So all that stuff has to be considered, early on. Otherwise, you'll put stuff in which, you'll get a reasonably hot fire, and suddenly all the fire detailing goes out the window, because it's not cognitive of it, especially dampers and ducts, because they're not designed for movement anyway.
Well, that's fascinating. So you're saying that ductwork, because normally ductwork would go through beams, wouldn't it?
Well, you can't put them through on the compartment line, because if you look at, this is what we're saying earlier, and Paul alluded to it as well, is that when you look at 1366 Part 1, the standard supported construction is EN 520 in Group A, B and 0, rigid structure at 650 plus or minus 200 up to 2,200 concrete, essentially, or aerated concrete. That is it. Anything else is called other. And the problem you find is if you put fire-rated ductwork through a steel beam, which is encapsulated, because that gives you insulation, it's only applicable to the type of beam and encapsulation that you've used. Then you've got to test it both ways round. Then if the beam's different, that's a new test. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, would it be right to say that people don't put ductwork through beams now on projects?
They shouldn't. But as Paul would tell you, this is what I'm saying about the safety cases, is that if, the MEP consultant's not an expert on what's been tested, neither's, the beam, the structural engineer just says I want a performance of 550 on a beam, or maybe they'll go 620, and that will be it. The fact that the MEP's coming through it, the services like your ductwork and your dampers, isn't something the test standard accounts for, so you cannot install them in it. That is the bottom line.
This comes down to my point of space, and if somebody sees a beam with some nice holes in it, they stick stuff through it. But there is no test evidence for dampers and ducts going through those holes in beams.
No.
There could be, but there isn't. So if somebody tests it, but then as Paul just said, it becomes complicated because your field of application isn't very broad. So if you had a 350 diameter hole and you stuck a 300 damper in it, that would be the maximum size you could go up to. You couldn't suddenly say, well, if I go bigger, it'll work, because you're not allowed to do that.
And if the beam thickness changes or it's non-castellated, then you're in another question, aren't you, Paul? Because it's different.
Yeah, it's different.
Undefinable.
I'd like to pick this up in a separate session if we can, because this is really, really important. What you've just revealed to me anyway this sounds to be something that we ought to flag up as being something that we need to look at separately.
Yeah, this is a paper in its own right, George, isn't it?
I think it is. I genuinely think it is. But so coming back to the change management process,
yeah,
what we're really saying is that what we need to do is to capture the baseline information set at each work stage, so that before a change takes place, we've got enough information about what the initially intended product would be. And then when it changes, that should go through maybe a technical submittal process. And what was the technical deviation, was it, that Audrey came up with? Audrey is an architect that's been working on a number of the other work sessions, and she used a term which I thought was very effective, and that rather than just being technical submittal, she called it technical deviation. I don't know if that's something you've come across. I thought it was good because it actually expresses it well.
You will have come across it because it's actually in the notes.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The key with change, though, isn't it, is it's when change comes in a project. So in the early stages of projects, change can be very fluid, and it's part of the process of developing a building. It's an architect, an engineer, an MEP consultant, all managing to a point. But there's certain stages when the management of the change needs to become more rigorous, because a process needs to be rerun to assess it. So in those early stages, there's lots of, we're designing layouts, we've got structural engineers designing frames, we've got M&E people giving us zones. And then there's those changes that then come that have impacts that need to rerun those things. So change management is an interesting one because it has different impacts at different stages in the project.
Well, change happens after a decision. If there's been no decision made, there's nothing to change.
Yeah.
What you're saying about within the design process, people are putting their inputs, and that's consultation, isn't it? But once a decision's made, then it can be changed. Otherwise, before that, there's nothing to change.
And this is a really good point, because quite often what you find is the hope is that we go through these. I mean, again, go back on BIM and go back on the data sets and these stage approvals. The idea is that we submit information, there is an approval to it, and then you move forward. Well, regularly that program and that procurement is happening at such a race that actually there probably isn't the right due diligence to check designs at the right stages. And then what's happening is it's already developing before it's really been agreed. So you don't have
horse before the cart. It's not been decided, but it's become a fact on the ground before a decision's been made.
Yeah, absolutely.
Paul.
I think I was just going to add to what you're saying there, Mike, is that, I mean, there's examples that Paul's been involved with Amir externally, because we do a bit of stuff I said earlier, is that I've had a project where I say I've got dampers in the basement, which are MSFDs on the drawing, right? If you look at this whole thing, so someone's gone, I want a part 2, motorized fire and smoke damper, not the right terminology that we use, Paul, but that's what they put. It's on the supply system to a big smoke control system in the basement. And what the smoke control system should be 12101 part 8. Is that right, Paul? Top of your head anyway, but it should be that one there. And you look at it and you go through, okay, we're going to change the damper to another one. Another one comes in at part 2. The problem is the damper's the wrong bloody damper anyway. In the spec, it's the wrong damper. Fundamentally, it's not right. Like I've got an AOV system. I'm not going to say where it is, but essentially it's a motorized AOV pressure differential system. It's a bloody silo door. I'm going to them, it's not right. It should be a damper. And they're going, well, why? After you specified, part 2, part 4 system, but you put a part 2 component on it. And the problem is how does that get picked up? We're going to talk about change, the performance, and you could argue it goes back to competency, but the performance has got to be right for the situation. So it's got to be, this is the standard you're installing it to. It's right for the application. The wall type is this, and all that stuff's got to be sucked in. Because otherwise, if you do like a technical deviation, are you deviating away from something which is technically incorrect in the first place, or you're deviating to make it right? Is the HSE picked up on it? not sure they will do. Because we struggle as industry to pick up on this stuff. That's why we use Paul and other people as experts to look at jobs for us. How does that work in the change process? That'd be some thought about how we pick it up. Is the performance right in the first place? That's probably the first question you need to ask, isn't it? Is it correct?
Yes.
I think that's one of the points, and we're talking about specifications, and the specifications are fundamentally wrong. I think somebody mentioned the NBS earlier. I'm seeing a lot of specifications that were from they start NES, so I assume that's the either the current or the old National Engineering Specification. But then that's taken, and then people cut it and copy and paste it, and they copy and cut and paste it, not knowing what they're doing, and then they just put all the standards in at the end so that they can't be wrong. We kind of need, I suppose, BIM to maybe help us with that, to say you can't mix this with that. So if in your model your original one says it's damper X and the whole side needs to be Y, then if you get damper C and the whole side needs to be size E, are those two at least compatible before you start? And that's your change management, is how do you stop things just being changed just by being changed? Is there any security we can build into that to say, oh, hang on, you can't put that in this because there's not going to be a big enough hole? Or
validation, really, validation of the new decision.
Yeah.
Have you? Was that in your email?
No, I don't think it was. I think that's.
If it wasn't, would you do me a favour and put it in the chat? In fact, everybody, because I've actually also got absorbed, so I kept forgetting to tell you. And if anybody who's said anything in the last half an hour that isn't on the document, would you please put it in the chat? I'm supposed to tell you to do that, but I was too busy listening. So it's right that you've taken over as chairman, you guys.
I think the important thing here as well is that the change management that we've largely been talking about is during the design and construction process. And what we're actually looking at as well is the use of the building over the next 50 or 100 years. And therefore there needs to be the brief as to what the product was that was installed, and also, as Paul was saying there, the context in which it was being used is critical.
I think a thing to pick up here, though, George. I mean, again, if you scroll down onto my image that I think you included,
yeah,
there is a big important thing here that we regularly find in the BIM world that isn't necessarily fully understood or undertaken, and that is the transition between PIMs and AIMs. So if you think about it, project information models, so the multitude of Revit models that are produced to deliver a scheme are one part of a process. There should be a secondary process, which is the transition of that information into an asset information model, then is used by clients to look after their assets afterwards. Now, that's really useful because there's a whole dialogue that happens to the delivery of a building, and then there's a process which is looking after an asset for the rest of its 50-year life. But at the moment, that process is never usually done correctly. They just take the model and then they just say, there it is. They don't do the process of extracting all the information and only giving the key things from that point forward.
Can I?
Yeah, picking up on that, the issue is we have sort of design and construction models, and we've been talking about the changes between the two, and there's also a liability associated with those models. I know particularly projects I've worked where contractors made changes to specified products and asked us to update those within our models for delivery, but we refused because, as far as we were concerned, those products did not meet the required specification.
Good point.
So, and it will happen vice versa, but it is clearly defining who has responsibility and liability for the information provided, as part of that whole change management process.
Daniel England.
Let me just unmute myself, avoid the schoolboy error.
Good to hear from you, Daniel.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to really echo what Mike was saying about the asset information model, about the need, to actually get that done, because otherwise it just becomes out of date. And the other thing we're doing a lot of recladding projects, sort of post Grenfell, and even our own models that we're digging back, they're made with old software that you've then got to scrabble around to try to bring that information forward, and it's going to be even harder. I mean, that's our own stuff. We've been actually going out getting a lot of surveys of buildings done because there's just no information out there about what it was. And
there really is no sort of mechanism truly in place to ensure that record information, as-built information, is actually correct at the completion of a project. As you said, there's regularly different challenges that exist, and that shows its case really well when you ask a client to provide you with information about their building and it's so out of date, it's not updated, or it's so incorrect, that causes you an initial problem from the onset.
I'm cautious about saying this, but because I don't want this to be a promotion thing, but Active Plan does exactly what you just said there, Mike. And also, Dan, we're working with PLP, you might know, the asset information model side of things as well. So I absolutely endorse what you just said there, both of you. But we've got some pretty robust ways of dealing with that handover between project information and the asset information, then managing it for the next 50 years. The other point that I would just quickly make is that people perceive that when you go from PIM to AIM, that's the end of the process. But actually, what you'll find is that the AIM has got lots of projects going on, which also need to also be captured, ideally using COBE, because you've got mini projects which are going to also need to be updating. So it's a cycle that we move through on that.
And I'm hoping. I'm sorry,
Ian.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to pick up on two things. What Paul was saying about products just being wrong. Welcome to my world. It's a very, very big issue. But we also work a lot on refurbishment projects, a lot on social housing and tower blocks and this sort of thing. And the number of times that we find there are issues because people have changed a building with no regard for fire safety whatsoever. And so whatever's installed just can't function because the whole design is now not fit for purpose anymore because the building has physically changed and it just doesn't get picked up. I mean, we've got lots of buildings we're working on where the building was compliant when it was built with the standards of the time, and then through the changes that have taken place and through it being done by people that had no regard for anything other than saving a bit of energy or a bit of comfort or something, they've disregarded fire safety completely and ended up with a building that is fundamentally unsafe, with no records of how it's ever happened. It's never. A lot of these buildings have been local authority controlled at the time, possibly. So there's no building control, there's no records, no nothing. And there's so many buildings that have been created like that. It's frightening.
Okay, I'm gonna carry on chatting afterwards, but I just want to wind up question 5. I know like Paul's busy typing away, which is great. Yeah. As I say, if anybody's got anything else to add into that, from what they've already said, please do so. Other than that, are we happy that question 5, the answers to question 5 pretty much cover it? Is anybody not happy?
The only thing I just wanted to add was just this role of the accountable person under the Building Safety Act, which could be a really significant part of all of this discussion. So this accountable person that then becomes the sole responsibility of keeping information on buildings up to date, that could massively have an impact on then the whole workflow of information being correct and processes to ensure that, you know, aims and so forth are right at the time of handing over.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, well, I'm going to say we're other than whatever you're currently typing in, I'm going to say question 5 we're happy with. But
Paul's got his hand up.
I thought that was still up. It was still up. Yeah.
Apologies. Sorry.
No, please carry on talking. I'm just trying to close off the question. That's all, because we're digressing a bit, which is great, but I don't want to stop us finishing.
Can I just ask a question, Richard? Mike, from what you were saying earlier with regard to the new building safety regs, do you see that we may be moving back towards a system where more products and materials are going to be specified at the earlier stage of the project?
I think the challenge at the moment is that the BSR and the Act at the moment will only be applicable to certain building types and certain building types at certain heights. So if the building falls into this sort of high risk category, then it will follow this new route, and that will add these additional processes to it, which I think will lead to that more product specified information being much more detailed pre-construction, and therefore the process through on site will be much more just delivering what was designed. I think where the challenge lies at the moment is that that won't be applicable to all buildings, and so you could find that certain buildings will go down the BSR route and certain buildings won't, so you will have different processes.
I've got a question on that, just in our little community here. I'm led to believe that the 18-meter rule is a little bit, it's more of a political and a thing than the reality.
Yeah.
And there is a strong likelihood that the regulations as they stand will start to evolve into buildings that are below 18 meters, because it doesn't make sense that if you're in a building that's 16 meters or 17 meters high, that you should be less safe than one that's at 8 meters.
I couldn't agree more, George. I think it's a really difficult situation at the moment, this 18 metre and also the determination of where this 18 metres is measured from, because there's differentials of guidance you can find about where that should be measured to. It causes so much problem with us in all of our funding applications for various buildings we're working on that we need clarity or the ambiguity removed.
Yeah, I mean, so go on, Paul. You go first.
I was going to say, I think I would tend to see the same thing. Is that people who are working on those buildings, that will push its way down to all their buildings, because they won't want to risk being unsafe anywhere, and they will follow belt and braces. And I think that's one thing that we should learn, is that now people are being careful. They're going to be careful everywhere. It's not just going to be, oh well, we can get away with it for this. I hope there will still be some people who are playing the game. But I think that's the case, that will go. And also, you know, we've seen changes in the marketplace, some of the issues that Paul alluded to. Some people are going to struggle to get back onto some people's lists. So, you know, there's going to be, you know, this product suits this application, this product suits that application. So it won't be a one manufacturer fits all scenario. people will say, well, I know that that works in this application and this works in that application, so these come from them and these come from them. And people will do it now through their own integrity and wanting to keep their own businesses safe from doing something wrong.
The other thing I would say is that the risks themselves, at the moment, the whole focus of risk is on fire and structure, largely because of what happened at Grenfell, right? But when we were discussing this recently, we were talking about risk, and nobody had, I was amazed, nobody had picked up infection control. Yeah, just wasn't on the list. Yeah, whereas ventilation and, you know, how that's structured, you know, control is something that clearly is a risk. I think the other thing is sustainability, environmental impact and all that sort of stuff. We need to be collecting that information as well, because it will become part of legislation, I think, very soon. And therefore, when we're actually collecting information, we need to be not simply focusing on the things that are a risk as far as fire is concerned.
Yeah, well, that was my when I started. I mentioned that the changes are coming into Part L and to Part F, yep. And you know, we're sealing everything up, but that means that we're going to have to get ventilation in, and your disease control, etc., infection control is largely governed by ventilation, because now people are going to say they want X amount of air change rates, which is, from an energy point of view, is really quite scary. But you know, you're right. We have to bear in mind that ventilation is going to change.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Well, we're well over time. I think we're all happy with where we've got to on the document. George, do you want to? Is this the time to try and set up or work out how you're going to set up that extra meeting?
Yeah, I mean, if what I'll do, if people are interested in running through that, I'd like to you know, let me think about how we frame that, but I think it's a really important point.
Okay, so basically, we'll get back to them on that.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. So that being the case, great, thank you, and I'm sure we'll see you again. I hope so.
If anybody's interested, Mike, I'd like to pick up with you on the asset information model side of things. If anybody else is interested in that, we can give you some examples of the work that we're doing with PLP. Actually, I don't know, Daniel, are you aware of what we're doing with Andrew Mellor and the team?
Yeah, and I was speaking to Mo Fisher.
Yeah,
he's been I've been sort of liaising with him.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of projects underway at the moment where we're doing it with existing buildings, and also with on a new build that we're just doing at the moment with on Higgs for Peabody. And again, we're creating an asset information model through the design and construction process that then they're going to use going forward. So we've got a range of things there that I think it would be useful to share. So I'll send a note out on that one as well, and then if you're interested, we can have a chat about it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'd be interested in that as well, certainly from the fire damper inspection side and everything else, because this isn't just an install issue anymore. It's a lifetime of the building issue, and we've got there's going to be a lot of expense where stuff's not right now. And then hopefully going ahead, then we'll have all the correct information, and it will make it easier and more cost effective for people. But you know, I went into a hospital the other day, and the only dampers that were installed probably correctly were the original ones, and all the ones that have been put in afterwards were not even close. So and they were dampers where they didn't even need them, which was even worse. So
yeah, Paul, the worst thing, even worse than that, we're working with Skanska, Engie, Sodexo, Interserve, Mighty on hospital projects, and the crap information that they got when they took over these PFI hospitals, it doesn't even tell them where the fire dampers are.
No, it don't surprise me.
No. Well, that's exactly what I found. I had to go finding them, and it was the state of trying to literally find stuff. I was going into plant rooms with half an inch of water on the floor, and goodness knows what. It's
Let's pick up that one, Paul. Something that as a result of the way the contracts are let, a lot of the contractors allegedly make sure there isn't any information for somebody that takes over the contract.
Yes.
Because it's a purely commercial thing. So they deliberately make sure that all the records that are there are no longer there when someone else takes over.
Yeah. But also, I did hear on PFI contracts that potentially the way it works is they don't highlight errors, because if they highlight errors, they have to fix them under the rules of their contracts. So therefore, they don't bother telling anybody about them. And then when somebody from outside goes in, but there must be some recourse through contracts and law for the hospitals on that. But I don't know. But it's a great contract to have. If you don't find anything, you don't have to fit anything. You don't have to fix it.
Yeah, one of the problems as well, Paul, is that generally the general managers of these PFI contracts, their tenure is worse than a football manager.
Oh, right. So they make more money out of it than anybody else then when they get fired.
Well, possibly. The point is that their focus is on the tenure that they're in place. So in other words, if they can push something on to the next incumbent, then they do so because they're never quite sure when they're going to get sacked.
No.
It's scary. The number. We've got a project that we've been on for about 5-6 years, and in 2 years. So anyway, brilliant. Listen, I've really enjoyed this, and thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Richard, sorry, taking over.
Okay, thank you again, and I'm sure we'll see. Well, hopefully all of you again in other meetings.
Good
Okay.
talk.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.